The wind howled through the canyon like a wounded beast, carrying with it the taste of dust and the promise of another scorching day. Red sandstone cliffs rose on either side of the valley, their faces scarred by centuries of wind and rain, standing as silent witnesses to the endless drama of survival that played out beneath them. The year was 1876, and the American West stretched wild and untamed, a land where civilization's rules bent and broke against the harsh realities of frontier life. Eagle Feather stood at the edge of the mesa, his weathered hands gripping the worn leather reins of his paint horse. At 35 winters, he commanded respect among the Apache people not through birthright alone, but through the strength of his arm and the wisdom of his decisions. His face, carved by sun and wind into sharp angles, rarely betrayed emotion. The eagle feathers woven into his long black hair marked him as a war chief, a leader of 50 families who looked to him for protection and guidance. Below, the camp stirred with the familiar rhythms of mourning. Women tended fires, their movements efficient and practiced. Children's laughter pierced the air as they chased prairie dogs between the scattered wickiups. The smell of mesquite smoke and cooking meat drifted upward, a comforting reminder of home in this unforgiving landscape. His wife, Mourning Dove, emerged from their dwelling, her movements graceful despite the heavy water jug balanced on her hip. She had been beautiful once, before 20 years of desert life had etched lines around her eyes and thinned her lips into a permanent expression of stoic endurance. She was a good wife, obedient, skilled in the old ways, mother to his 3 children. Yet, when Eagle Feather looked at her, he felt only the quiet companionship of duty, not the fire that the old song spoke of. "The scouts return," she said simply, gesturing toward the dust cloud approaching from the east. Eagle Feather nodded, already moving toward his horse. The scouts had been tracking a wagon train for 3 days, watching its progress through Apache territory. The white settlers grew bolder each season, their wooden wheels carving deeper ruts into land that had known only moccasins and unshod hooves for countless generations. The lead scout, a young warrior named Swift Arrow, dismounted before his chief. His face was flushed with excitement and something else, concern. "They camp at Willow Spring," he reported. 20 wagons, many rifles. They posted guards, but they are careless. They drink the firewater and grow lazy in the heat. Eagle Feather considered this information carefully. Willow Spring was sacred to his people, a rare source of sweet water in the drought-stricken land. The whites had no right to foul it with their presence. "How many fighters?" he asked. "Perhaps 30 men of fighting age, women and children also." The chief's jaw tightened. He had no love for the white invaders who brought disease and discord to his people. But attacking wagons with families required careful thought. The army would retaliate harshly against any perceived massacre. "We strike at dawn," he decided. "Take only what we need. Horses, rifles, ammunition. Drive them from our water, but spare those who do not resist." The raid came with the first pale light of morning. Eagle Feather led 20 warriors down from the rocks above Willow Spring, their war cries shattering the desert silence. The settlers, groggy and unprepared, scrambled for their weapons. Gunfire cracked across the camp as Apache arrows found their marks. Eagle Feather rode through the chaos with deadly purpose, his lance striking down a man who tried to aim a rifle at Swift Arrow. The Apache warriors moved like shadows, using the terrain and surprise to devastating advantage. Within minutes, the surviving settlers were fleeing on foot into the desert, abandoning their wagons and supplies. As the dust settled, Eagle Feather surveyed the captured goods. Rifles, powder, blankets, metal tools, all valuable prizes for his people. The warriors began gathering the spoils, their voices raised in victory songs. It was Swift Arrow who found her. "Chief," he called from behind an overturned wagon. "A woman hides here." Eagle Feather approached to find a white woman pressed against the wagon wheel, her blue calico dress torn and dusty. She couldn't have been more than 25 summers, with hair the color of corn silk and eyes like the morning sky. But it was not her beauty that struck him. Many white women were beautiful in their pale, fragile way. It was the defiance in her gaze, the way she lifted her chin and stared directly at him without cowering. Blood ran from a cut on her forehead, and her hands were scraped raw from crawling across the rocky ground. Yet she gripped a broken wagon, spoke like a weapon, ready to fight despite the hopelessness of her position. "Kill me then," she said in accented but clear Apache words, surprising him. "I will not beg." Eagle Feather studied her for a long moment. Most white women would be screaming or fainting. This one met his gaze like a warrior facing death. "You speak our tongue," he observed. "My father traded with your people before you became our enemies," she replied, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "I learned from the Mescalero. Your father was a fool to trust us," Eagle Feather said. "Where is he now?" Her jaw tightened. "Dead. Killed by soldiers who mistook him for a Confederate of the Apache. They said any white man who befriended Indians was a traitor." The irony was not lost on Eagle Feather. He made a decision that would echo through the rest of his days. "You are my prisoner," he announced. "You will come with us." Swift Arrow looked surprised. "Chief, the others are gone." Eagle Feather cut him off. "This one stays." He extended his hand to help her mount behind him, but she stood on her own, using the wagon wheel to pull herself upright. Even in defeat, she would not accept his assistance. Something stirred in Eagle Feather's chest, respect, perhaps, or recognition of a kindred spirit. The ride back to camp was made in tense silence. The woman, he would later learn her name was Sarah Morrison, sat rigidly behind him, careful not to touch him more than necessary. The other warriors cast suspicious glances their way, muttering among themselves. Taking prisoners was not unusual, but keeping a white woman was dangerous. It invited retaliation and stirred bad medicine. When they reached camp, the entire band gathered to see their returning warriors and the strange prize Eagle Feather had claimed. Women clicked their tongues in disapproval. Children peered from behind their mothers' skirts at the pale-skinned stranger. Mourning Dove stood at the entrance to their wickiup, her face carefully neutral. But Eagle Feather saw the tightening around her eyes, the way her fingers gripped the grinding stone she held. She understood, perhaps better than he did himself, that something fundamental had shifted with this woman's arrival. "She is to be kept in the prisoner's shelter," Eagle Feather announced to the gathered crowd. "She will work for her food like any captive. Any who harm her will answer to me." An elder, Sleeping Bear, stepped forward. His ancient face was creased with concern. "This is unwise. Eagle Feather, the white soldiers will come looking for her, and keeping a white woman brings trouble to the harmony of our camp. The soldiers will find only empty desert." Eagle Feather replied firmly, "We move camp tomorrow, deeper into the mountains where they cannot follow. The woman is my decision to make." As Sarah was led away to a small wickiup at the edge of camp, she turned back once. Her eyes met Eagle Feather's across the crowd, and in them he saw not gratitude for sparing her life, but a burning pride that refused to be extinguished. She would not thank him for making her a captive any more than he would apologize for taking her. That night, as Eagle Feather lay beside Mourning Dove in their dwelling, he found himself thinking of those defiant blue eyes. His wife's breathing was deep and even beside him, the comfortable rhythm of 20 years of marriage. Yet he felt restless, as if something long dormant had awakened within him. Outside, the desert wind continued its eternal song, and somewhere in the darkness, a woman with corn silk hair sat alone in a strange land, nursing her wounds and planning her survival. Neither of them could know that this day had set in motion events that would shatter their worlds and leave nothing unchanged. The stars wheeled overhead, indifferent to human suffering and desire, while below them, two people's destinies had become entangled in ways that would echo through the canyons long after the last fire had turned to ash. The prisoner's wickiup stood at the edge of camp like an afterthought, its buffalo hide walls patched and weathered. Inside, Sarah Morrison sat on the hard-packed earth, her wrists raw from the rawhide bonds that had only recently been removed. 3 days had passed since her capture, 3 days of hostile stares and suspicious whispers that followed her every movement. The shelter was barely large enough for her to lie down, furnished only with a moth-eaten blanket and a clay water jug. Through gaps in the hide covering, she could see the daily life of the Apache camp continuing around her, women scraping hides, children playing with bone dolls, warriors sharpening weapons. It was a world both foreign and strangely familiar, reminding her of the peaceful trading posts where her father had conducted business years ago. Her stomach cramped with hunger. The morning's meal had been a handful of dried berries and a strip of tough jerky, barely enough to keep her standing. She understood this was deliberate. Prisoners earned their keep or starved. Pride warred with practicality as she considered her options. The tent flap lifted, and Mourning Dove entered, carrying a basket of mending. The chief's wife moved with quiet dignity, her face revealing nothing as she set the basket before Sarah. "You sew?" she asked in careful English. Sarah nodded, grateful for any chance to prove her usefulness. "Yes." Mourning Dove handed her a bone needle and sinew thread, then pointed to a torn shirt. Her dark eyes studied Sarah's face with an intensity that made the younger woman uncomfortable. What did she see there? A rival? A curiosity? A burden? They worked in silence for a time, the only sound the whisper of a needle through hide. Sarah's fingers, though stiff from her bonds, remembered the countless hours spent mending her father's trading goods. She made small, careful stitches, determined to show her worth. "You have husband?" Mourning Dove asked suddenly. Sarah's hand stilled. "He died. Fever. 2 winters ago." "Children?" "No." The word came out harsher than intended, carrying the weight of that particular sorrow. Mourning Dove absorbed this information with a small nod. "Is good. Children make captivity harder." There was something in her tone, not quite sympathy, but a recognition of shared womanhood that transcended their circumstances. Sarah wondered if Mourning Dove had always been Apache, or if she, too, had once been an outsider brought into the tribe. The tent flap stirred again, and Eagle Feather entered. Both women tensed, though for different reasons. Sarah kept her eyes on her sewing, acutely aware of his presence filling the small space. He spoke to his wife in rapid Apache, and though Sarah understood some of the words, the meaning escaped her. Mourning Dove's responses were brief, almost curt. She gathered the completed mending and rose to leave, but not before casting one more searching look at Sarah. Then the 2 women were alone with Eagle Feather. He crouched before her, studying her work with the same intensity he might examine a horse he was considering for trade. Sarah forced herself to continue sewing, though her fingers trembled slightly under his scrutiny. "You'll learn quickly," he said finally. "This is good." "I'm not afraid of work," Sarah replied, then added with a flash of her old defiance, "though I work better when I'm not half-starved." A smile ghosted across his features, the first she had seen from him. "Prisoners who work well eat better. This is our way." "And is it your way to visit your prisoners personally?" The words escaped before she could stop them. His expression hardened. "You are under my protection. I ensure you are treated fairly." "Fairly?" Sarah set down the sewing, her eyes meeting his directly. "I'm kept like an animal, given scraps, stared at like some circus curiosity. If this is fair treatment, I'd hate to see unfair." Eagle Feather's jaw tightened, but something in his eyes suggested he was not entirely displeased by her spirit. "You would prefer I had left you in the desert? The buzzards are less particular about their dinner conversation." Despite herself, Sarah felt the corner of her mouth twitch. At least the buzzards would have been quick about it. "You speak as a warrior would," he observed. "This is unusual for a white woman. My father always said I had too much fight in me for my own good." Sarah admitted. "Said it would be the death of me one day." Perhaps he was right. Eagle Feather reached into a pouch at his belt and withdrew something wrapped in leather. But not today. He unwrapped a piece of fresh bread. White man's bread. Probably taken in the raid. Sarah's mouth watered at the sight, but she made no move to take it. "Go on," he said, setting it on the ground between them. Pride makes a poor meal. She took the bread, forcing herself to eat slowly despite her hunger. It was slightly stale, but tasted like heaven after days of near starvation. Eaglefeather watched her eat with an unreadable expression. "Why do you come here?" she asked between bites. "The great chief surely has better things to do than watch a prisoner eat." He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he spoke, his voice was thoughtful. "You remind me of a story my grandmother told, about a hawk caught in a snare. The hunter's children wanted to keep it, to tame it. But the grandmother said, 'A hawk may live in a cage, but it will always remember the sky.' And what happened to the hawk? The hunter kept it anyway. It lived many years, grew fat on easy meat, but it never sang again, and its eyes grew dull." He stood, preparing to leave. "I think you are like that hawk. The question is whether your spirit will survive the cage." After he left, Sarah sat in the gathering dusk, the taste of bread still on her tongue. She understood now that her survival depended on more than just work. Eaglefeather was drawn to her spirit, her defiance. As long as she intrigued him, she had value beyond mere labor. Over the following weeks, a routine developed. Each morning, Morning Dove would bring work, sewing, basket weaving, grinding corn. The chief's wife said little, but her silence had gradations that Sarah learned to read. Sometimes it was cold, sometimes merely watchful, occasionally almost companionable. Other women of the camp gradually began to interact with her as well. An elderly woman named Singing Cloud taught her which roots were good for eating and which for medicine. A younger woman, Pale Moon, showed her how to properly scrape a hide without tearing it. They treated her not as a guest, but as a low-ranking member of the band, which was perhaps the best she could hope for. But it was Eaglefeather's visits that punctuated her days like unexpected thunderstorms. He would appear without warning, sometimes bringing extra food, sometimes simply sitting in silence while she worked. Their conversations ranged from careful exchanges about camp life to something approaching actual discourse. "You had a husband," he said one evening as she repaired a pair of moccasins. "Did you love him?" The question surprised her. "I respected him. He was a good man, steady, safe." "That is not what I asked." Sarah set down her work, considering. "No, I suppose I didn't. Not the way the poets write about. But love is a luxury for wealthy women with choices. I had neither wealth nor choices. And now you have even less," he pointed out. "Yes," she agreed. "But strangely, I feel more alive as your prisoner than I did as a free woman in a loveless marriage. What does that say about me?" "That you have a warrior's spirit trapped in a woman's body." Eaglefeather replied, "Among my people, such women become medicine healers or story keepers. They are honored. And among my people, they're called difficult and end up spinsters or worse." Sarah said with bitter humor. These conversations were dangerous, she knew. Each one wove another thread between them, creating a connection that had no future. She saw how Morning Dove watched them, how the other warriors muttered when their chief spent too long at the prisoner's tent. But she could no more stop talking to him than she could stop breathing. One night, a violent thunderstorm lashed the camp. Sarah's wickiup, already fragile, began to leak steadily. She huddled under her blanket, shivering as cold water dripped through the gaps. Lightning illuminated the camp in stark, brief moments, and thunder shook the ground. The tent flap flew open, and Eaglefeather appeared, water streaming from his hair and shoulders. Without a word, he grabbed her arm and pulled her out into the storm. She gasped as rain struck her face, but he was already leading her to a larger, sturdier shelter, a storage tent for preserved foods and supplies. Inside, it was dry and surprisingly warm. Buffalo robes were stacked along one wall, and the air smelled of dried meat and herbs. Eaglefeather released her arm, and they stood facing each other, both soaked through and breathing hard. "You cannot stay there tonight," he said simply. "The shelter will not hold." Sarah pushed wet hair from her face, acutely aware of how her soaked dress clung to her body. "And in the morning, what will your people say when they find me here?" That their chief protected valuable property from the storm, he replied, but his eyes said something different entirely. They stood there, separated by merely an arm's length, while the storm raged outside. Sarah felt the moment balance on a knife's edge. One word, one movement from either of them would shatter the careful boundaries they had maintained. It was Eaglefeather who stepped back first, turning to grab a buffalo robe from the stack. "You should get warm," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "The storm will pass by morning." He left without looking back, disappearing into the rain and darkness. Sarah wrapped herself in the buffalo robe and sank to the ground, her heart pounding. She had seen it in his eyes, the same impossible longing that was growing in her own chest, a feeling that had no name and no future, as destructive as the lightning that split the sky above. Morning brought clear skies and consequences. Sarah emerged from the storage tent to find the entire camp watching. Mourning Dove stood by her wickiup, her face a mask of controlled fury. The damaged prisoners' shelter had indeed collapsed in the night, validating Eaglefeather's decision. But everyone understood that something had shifted. From that night forward, the looks became harder, the whispers louder. Sarah felt the growing tension like a living thing, coiling tighter with each passing day. She was no longer just a prisoner. She had become a threat to the careful balance of the chief's household, perhaps to the stability of the band itself. And still, Eaglefeather came to see her, drawn by something stronger than wisdom or duty. In their careful conversations, in the space between what was said and unsaid, a dangerous truth was taking root. The chief was falling in love with his white prisoner, and she with him. It was a truth that could destroy them both, yet neither seemed able to turn away from its inexorable pull. The whispers spread through the camp like wildfire after a lightning strike. Women bent their heads together over cooking pots, their voices low but sharp with disapproval. Warriors who had once respected their chief without question now exchanged meaningful glances when Eaglefeather passed. The very air seemed charged with unspoken accusations. Sarah felt the weight of their judgment every time she ventured from her rebuilt shelter, where once she had been merely a curiosity. She was now something far more dangerous, a threat to the natural order, a pale-skinned disruption in their carefully balanced world. Children who had begun to smile at her were pulled away by their mothers. The small kindnesses that had made her captivity bearable gradually disappeared. It was Sleeping Bear who finally gave voice to what everyone was thinking. The elder called a council meeting on a cool autumn evening, when the aspens on the distant mountains had turned gold like coins. Sarah watched from her shelter as the important members of the band gathered around the central fire, their faces grave in the flickering light. Though she couldn't hear every word, the gestures and raised voices told the story clearly enough. Sleeping Bear's gnarled finger pointed toward her shelter, then at Eaglefeather. Other elders nodded, their expressions stern. She saw Swift Arrow stand to speak, his young face torn between loyalty to his chief and concern for his people. Eaglefeather sat like a statue throughout, his face revealing nothing. Only the tight line of his jaw betrayed any emotion. When he finally rose to speak, his voice carried clearly across the camp, strong and unwavering. Sarah didn't need to understand every Apache word to grasp his message. The prisoner was his responsibility, under his protection, and he would manage the situation as he saw fit. But the seed of discord had been planted, and it grew with each passing day. Mourning Dove's confrontation came 3 days later, in the gray hour before dawn when the camp still slept. Sarah woke to find the chief's wife standing in her shelter, a bone knife glinting in her hand. For a heart-stopping moment, Sarah thought her life was about to end. Then Mourning Dove spoke, her voice low and fierce. "You think I am blind? Stupid?" She spoke in English, each word sharp as the blade she held. 20 winters I am his wife. I bear his children. I keep his lodge. I follow him from our homeland to this desert. And now you come, with your pale skin and your warrior words, and you steal what is mine. Sarah sat up slowly, careful not to make any sudden movements. I have stolen nothing. I am a prisoner here. Nothing more. Lies, Morning Dove's voice cracked with emotion. I see how he looks at you, how you look at him. You poison his mind with your strange ways. I never asked to be brought here, Sarah said quietly. I never asked for his attention. But you welcome it. Morning Dove's eyes glittered with unshed tears. You could turn away. You could show respect. Instead, you encourage him, make him weak. The accusation hit close to home. Sarah knew there was truth in it. She had not discouraged Eaglefeather's visits, had perhaps even looked forward to them. But she also knew that rejecting him outright might mean losing his protection. And in this hostile camp, that could mean death. What would you have me do? Sarah asked. Morning Dove was silent for a long moment, the knife trembling in her grip. Then she seemed to deflate, the anger draining away to leave only sorrow. I would have you disappear, she whispered. I would have you never have come. I would have my husband's heart back. She left without violence, but her words lingered like smoke in the small shelter. Sarah lay awake until dawn, wrestling with guilt and fear and something else, a longing she could no longer deny. The pressures on Eaglefeather were equally intense. Warriors who had followed him without question now hesitated before obeying orders. Hunting parties returned with less game, claiming bad luck, though everyone suspected intentional failure. The band's medicine man, Spotted Crow, declared that the presence of the white woman had brought evil spirits to their camp. Through it all, Eaglefeather maintained his stoic facade, but Sarah could see the strain in the deepening lines around his eyes, the way his shoulders carried invisible weight. Yet still he came to her, drawn by something stronger than political wisdom. One evening, as the first snows dusted the mountains, he brought her a rabbit fur cloak. Winter comes early this year, he said, wrapping it around her shoulders. His hands lingered a moment too long, and Sarah caught her breath. They were alone in her shelter, the camp quiet around them. The warmth of the fur was nothing compared to the heat of his nearness. Your people grow restless, she said, needing to break the dangerous tension. Your wife came to me. She is hurt. Morning Dove is a good woman, Eaglefeather agreed, his voice heavy. She deserves better than a husband whose heart has flown beyond reach. Then call your heart back, Sarah urged, though the words pained her. Send me away, trade me to another band, or to the Mexicans. End this before what? He turned to face her fully, and she saw her own turmoil reflected in his dark eyes. Before I admit what we both know, that when I look at you, I see not a white woman or a prisoner, but the other half of my spirit. The confession hung between them like a challenge. Sarah's carefully constructed walls crumbled. You cannot say such things. We cannot. I know what we cannot do, he interrupted. I know my duty, my responsibilities. I know the price of wanting you, but knowing changes nothing. I am lost. Sarah Morrison, as lost as you were in that desert. She reached out without thinking, her fingers touching his face. He closed his eyes at the contact, turning his head to press his lips against her palm. The gesture was so gentle, so full of restrained longing, that it broke her heart. We are both lost then, she whispered. A commotion outside shattered the moment. Shouts and running feet, the whinny of frightened horses. Eaglefeather was on his feet instantly, hand on his knife. He peered out of the shelter, then cursed in Apache. What is it? Sarah asked. Sickness, he said grimly. The children. The fever struck with devastating swiftness. Within days, a third of the camp's children were burning with heat, crying for water that wouldn't stay down. The medicine man's chants and herbs proved useless against what Sarah recognized as scarlet fever, a white man's disease that cut through indigenous populations like a scythe through wheat. The camp descended into chaos. Grieving mothers wailed over small bodies. Fathers stood helpless as their children suffered, and, inevitably, blame found its target. She brought this, Spotted Crow declared, pointing at Sarah with a shaking finger. The white woman carries death spirits. As long as she remains, our children will die. A crowd gathered, their faces twisted with grief and rage. Sarah backed against her shelter, heart pounding. She had survived scarlet fever as a child, carried immunity in her blood. But how could she explain that to people who saw only correlation between her presence and their tragedy? Eagle Feather placed himself between her and the mob, his stance protective, but his position impossible. To defend her now, when children lay dying, would destroy any remaining authority he held. It was Mourning Dove who surprised everyone. She stepped forward, her own eyes red from crying over sick children, and spoke in a clear voice. "The sickness comes from the raid, from the white man's blankets and goods we took, not from her." The crowd hesitated, torn between their need for someone to blame and respect for the chief's wife. In that moment of uncertainty, a child's cry pierced the air, another fever victim. The crowd dispersed, drawn back to their individual tragedies, but the damage was done. Eagle Feather's position as chief hung by a thread, and everyone knew it. That night, as snow began to fall in earnest, he made a decision that would echo through the winter. "You will move to my lodge," he announced to Sarah. "The shelter is not warm enough for the coming storms." It was practical, defensible even. Her flimsy shelter truly wouldn't withstand a harsh winter. But everyone understood the real message. The chief was choosing his white prisoner over the wishes of his people, placing her under his personal protection despite the consequences. Mourning Dove received the news in silence, then quietly gathered her belongings and moved to her sister's lodge with the children. It was not uncommon for Apache wives to maintain separate dwellings, but the timing spoke volumes. As Sarah entered Eagle Feather's lodge for the first time, she felt the weight of every watching eye. The interior was warm and well-appointed, with thick buffalo robes and painted designs on the hide walls. It smelled of sage and wood smoke and him. "You have destroyed yourself for me," she said softly. "I was destroyed the moment I saw you raise that broken wagon spoke like a weapon," he replied. Everything since has been merely the recognition of that fact. Outside, the snow fell harder, blanketing the camp in white. Inside, two people from different worlds faced the truth that their impossible connection had already cost them everything, and that the price would only grow steeper with each passing day. The fever eventually burned itself out, leaving small graves and shattered families in its wake. Eagle Feather's band, once unified and strong, was now fractured along lines of loyalty and tradition. Some still followed their chief, believing in his strength and wisdom. Others whispered of finding a new leader, one whose heart remained with his people. And at the center of it all, a love that should never have existed continued to grow, as inevitable and destructive as the winter storms that raged across the high desert. Neither Eagle Feather nor Sarah could deny it anymore. Even as they watched it tear apart everything around them, they were past the point of wisdom, past the point of return, falling toward a destiny that could only end in tragedy. Winter descended upon the camp like a judgment, fierce and unforgiving. The wind cut through the valley with teeth of ice, and snow piled against the wickiups until they looked like white hills dotting the landscape. It was the harshest winter the elders could remember, as if the very earth reflected the discord that had fractured the band. Sarah pulled her rabbit fur cloak tighter as she stepped outside Eagle Feather's lodge to gather firewood. The hostile stares that met her had grown colder than the weather. Women turned their backs when she passed. Warriors spat in the snow. Even the dogs seemed to growl more fiercely at her approach. She had become fluent enough in Apache to understand the muttered curses and predictions of doom that followed her footsteps. Witch, they called her, heart-stealer, bringer of death. The words stung, but not as much as the knowledge that they were partly true. Her presence had indeed brought destruction, though not in the way they imagined. Inside the lodge, Eagle Feather sat studying a map drawn on deerskin, planning the band's next move. Food was scarce, game driven away by the harsh weather. The usual winter camps were compromised, known now to the army patrols that had increased since the wagon train raid. His people needed strong leadership, clear decisions, and unity. Instead, they had a chief whose mind was divided, whose heart was torn between duty and desire. The scouts report soldiers at Bitter Creek. he said without looking up as she entered. We must move deeper into the mountains. Sarah set down the firewood, studying his profile in the firelight. The past weeks had aged him. Gray touched his temples where none had been before, and his shoulders carried the weight of his failing leadership like physical chains. Your people will not follow you much longer, she said quietly. Not with me here. His jaw tightened. They will follow, or they will leave. That is their choice. And your wife, your children, what choice do they have? Eagle Feather finally looked at her, and the pain in his eyes made her catch her breath. Mourning Dove has made her choice. She turns my children against me, fills their heads with stories of how their father has lost his way. Perhaps she is right. Sarah knelt beside him, close enough to feel his warmth, but not touching. They had been careful to maintain physical distance, knowing that the slightest breach would shatter their fragile control. Then why continue this? Send me away. Heal your family. Save your position. Could you cut out your own heart? He asked. Because that is what you ask of me. The confession hung between them, raw and undeniable. Sarah felt tears sting her eyes. This is madness. We are destroying everything for something that can never be. Can never be? Eagle Feather's voice dropped low. It already is. Every breath I take is yours. Every heartbeat calls your name. I have tried to silence it, tried to remember my duty, my honor, but love is stronger than will. Love? The word escaped as barely a whisper. He reached out, his fingers ghosting along her cheek without quite touching. What else would you call this fire that consumes us both? A commotion outside interrupted whatever response she might have made. Angry voices rose above the wind. An Eagle Feather was on his feet instantly. He grabbed his rifle and stepped outside, Sarah following despite his gesture to stay back. A group of warriors stood in the swirling snow, Swift Arrow at their head. The young warrior's face was set with determination and sorrow. We leave, Swift Arrow announced. 15 families come with us. We go south to join Red Sky's band. Eagle Feather received the news without flinching. That is your right. Take what supplies you need. We would take our chief with us. Swift Arrow continued, his voice rising with emotion. Leave the white woman. Come back to your people, to your true self. It is not too late. For a moment, the wind died, and the camp held its breath. Sarah saw Eagle Feather's internal struggle play across his features. Here was his chance, redemption, restoration, a return to the life he had known. All he had to do was turn away from her. My path is chosen, Eagle Feather said finally. Go in peace, Swift Arrow. May you find better hunting in the south. The young warrior's face crumpled with disappointment before hardening into resolve. Then you are no longer our chief. You are just a man bewitched, and we will not follow you to destruction. The group departed that very night, taking their lodges, their horses, their futures with them. By morning, the camp had shrunk by nearly half. Those who remained were the elderly, the loyal few, and those too weak or afraid to attempt the journey south in winter. Mourning Dove stood watching the departing families, her children clutched close, when her sister's family began packing to leave. Sarah saw the chief's wife face an impossible choice: stay with a husband who no longer saw her, or leave with her kin and break her marriage vows. In the end, she chose a middle path. Mourning Dove would remain in the camp, but would not return to Eagle Feather's lodge. The separation was complete, visible to all, a daily reminder of what the chief had sacrificed for his white prisoner. That night, as the depleted camp settled into uneasy silence, Eagle Feather sat staring into the fire. Sarah worked quietly on the other side of the lodge, mending torn leather with mechanical precision. The weight of the day's losses pressed down on them both. I have never seen you cry, he said suddenly. Sarah looked up, surprised. What? In all these months, through capture and captivity, through hunger and hostility, I have never seen you shed a tear. Yet tonight, I think you weep inside. She set down her work, considering. My father used to say tears were a luxury the frontier couldn't afford. that they changed nothing, helped nothing, only showed weakness to those who would exploit it. Your father was wrong, Eagle Feather said softly. Tears are how the spirit cleanses itself of poison. A warrior who cannot weep becomes brittle, like a bow left too long in the sun. The gentleness in his voice undid her. The tears came then, silent at first, then in gasping sobs that shook her entire frame. She wept for the families torn apart, for Mourning Dove's pain, for the children who looked at their father with confusion and hurt. She wept for herself, trapped between two worlds and welcome in neither. Most of all, she wept for the impossible love that had sprouted in the worst possible soil. Eagle Feather moved to her then, gathering her into his arms. It was the first time they had truly touched since that night in her shelter, and the contact was electric. Sarah buried her face against his chest, breathing in the scent of smoke and leather and home, for that's what he had become, against all reason. I am sorry, she whispered between sobs. I am so sorry for all of it, as am I, he murmured into her hair. Sorry for the pain caused, but not for loving you. Never for that. They held each other as the fire burned low, two souls finding solace in shared sorrow. Outside, the wind howled its disapproval, and snow continued to fall on a camp divided and dying. But inside the lodge, for just a moment, there was warmth and understanding and the terrible comfort of a love acknowledged at last. Dawn brought new challenges. The remaining band members looked to their diminished chief for guidance, but resources were stretched thin. The warriors who had left had been among the best hunters. Food stores dwindled rapidly, and the harsh winter showed no signs of relenting. Spotted Crow, the medicine man who had stayed out of loyalty to tradition rather than to Eagle Feather, performed ceremony after ceremony to appease the angry spirits. His chants echoed through the camp day and night, a constant reminder of the spiritual crisis that accompanied the physical one. Sarah tried to help where she could, but her efforts were rejected more often than not. The women would not accept food from her hands. The children ran when she approached. She had become a ghost in the camp, visible but untouchable, present but excluded. One gray afternoon, as she struggled to break ice from the water source, she felt eyes upon her. A young boy, perhaps 7 winters old, stood watching. He was Eagle Feather's youngest son, called Little Hawk. His face held his father's strong features but his mother's gentle eyes. Why does my father keep you? The boy asked in careful Apache. Sarah straightened, choosing her words carefully. You should ask your father this question. He will not speak of you. Mother cries when I ask. Grandmother says you have stolen his spirit. The innocent honesty of children could cut deeper than any warrior's blade. Sarah knelt in the snow, meeting the boy's eyes. I have stolen nothing. Little Hawk, sometimes hearts choose paths we do not expect or want. It brings pain to many, and for that, I am deeply sorry. The boy studied her with that penetrating gaze children possess. Are you sorry you came? Sarah thought of Eagle Feather's arms around her, of conversations that touched her soul, of a connection deeper than anything she had known. Then she thought of Mourning Dove's tears, of families scattered, of this child growing up in a broken home. Yes, she said finally. I am sorry I came. Little Hawk nodded, seeming satisfied with this answer, and ran back toward his mother's lodge. Sarah remained kneeling in the snow, the weight of truth heavy on her shoulders. Love might be stronger than will, as Eagle Feather had said, but it was not stronger than the destruction it caused, and that destruction was far from over. The council fire burned low as Mourning Dove stood before the remaining elders, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. She had painted her face with the white clay of mourning, not for death, but for the loss of her marriage, her life, her place in the world. The gathered elders, those who had not fled south with swift arrow, listened with grave faces as she spoke the words that would shatter the last pretense of normalcy in their fractured camp. I stand before you as a woman wronged, she began, her words falling like stones into still water. For 20 winters, I have been a faithful wife. I have borne children, kept the lodge. Followed my husband through hardship and plenty. I have earned my place by the chief's fire." Sleeping Bear nodded slowly. His ancient face creased with sorrow. Spotted Crow clutched his medicine bundle, muttering prayers under his breath. The other elders, 2 old warriors and 3 clan mothers, waited in silence for her to continue. Now my husband shares his lodge with the enemy. He speaks to her with words meant for a wife. He looks at her with eyes that once looked at me. Mourning Dove's voice cracked, but she pressed on. He has broken the sacred bonds. He has chosen pale skin over his own people, foreign ways over our traditions. From his seat at the edge of the firelight, Eagle Feather watched his wife's public condemnation with a face carved from stone. Sarah was not present. He had forbidden her to attend, knowing her presence would only inflame tensions. But her absence was felt as keenly as if she stood among them, a ghost haunting every word spoken. "What remedy do you seek, daughter?" asked Singing Cloud, the eldest of the clan mothers. Mourning Dove straightened her shoulders. "I seek the dissolution of my marriage bonds. I seek the restoration of my honor, and I seek justice, the removal of the white woman who has poisoned my husband's mind and brought discord to our people." A murmur ran through the small gathering. Divorce was not unknown among the Apache, but for a chief's wife to publicly demand it was unprecedented. It would strip Eagle Feather of crucial support, marking him as a man who could not maintain harmony in his own household. Sleeping Bear turned to Eagle Feather. "You have heard your wife's words. What answer do you give?" Eagle Feather rose slowly, his tall frame casting long shadows in the firelight. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of his position, though everyone knew that authority hung by a thread. "Mourning Dove speaks truth. I have caused her pain, and for that, my heart is heavy. She has been a good wife, a good mother. She deserves a husband whose whole heart is hers." He paused, his jaw tightening. "If she wishes to dissolve our marriage, I will not contest it. She is free to take what is hers, the children, her belongings, her bride price. I will provide for them as I am able." "And the white woman?" Spotted Crow interjected, his voice sharp with accusation. "Will you send her away to heal these wounds?" Eagle Feather met the medicine man's glare steadily. "Sarah Morrison remains under my protection. This is not negotiable." The simple declaration fell like a war club into their midst. Several elders gasped. Mourning Dove's composure finally cracked, tears streaming down her painted cheeks. "Then you choose her," she cried. "Before your wife, your children, your people, you choose her." "I choose nothing," Eagle Feather replied, his voice heavy with exhaustion. "The choice was made for me the moment I looked into her eyes. I can no more change it than I can call back the snows of yesterday." Singing Cloud, who had remained silent until now, spoke with the weight of her many years. "Love is not always wise, Eagle Feather, but a chief must be wise always. You speak of choice being taken from you, but every day you choose to keep her here. Every day you choose her over us." The truth of her words struck home. Eagle Feather stood silent for a long moment, then spoke the words that would seal his fate. "Then perhaps I am no longer fit to be chief." The statement hung in the air like smoke. Even Mourning Dove looked shocked. A chief stepping down voluntarily was almost unheard of, an admission of complete failure. Sleeping Bear struggled to his feet, his voice urgent. "Think what you say, Eagle Feather. Without your leadership, without my leadership, you may find unity again." Eagle Feather interrupted. "The people who remain deserve better than a chief whose heart is divided. Choose another to lead. I will stay through the winter, help where I can, but come spring." He trailed off, the future too uncertain to name. The council dissolved in confusion and dismay. Mourning Dove fled to her sister's lodge. Her victory turned to ash. The elders huddled together, whispering of unprecedented times and dark omens. And Eagle Feather walked alone back to his lodge, where Sarah waited. She knew the moment he entered that something fundamental had changed. His face carried a strange peace, the look of a man who had finally stopped fighting the current and accepted where it would take him. "What happened?" she asked, though part of her already knew. "I am no longer chief," he said simply. Mourning Dove is no longer my wife. Come spring, we leave this place. Sarah felt the world tilt. Leave? Where would we go? Away. He sat heavily, suddenly looking older than his years. Perhaps to Mexico, perhaps to California. Somewhere neither Apache nor white man knows our faces. Your children will be taught to hate my memory. He finished. It is the price of choosing you. The weight of his sacrifice crashed over her. Sarah sank to her knees beside him, taking his face in her hands. I am not worth this. No love is worth this. You are worth everything, he said fiercely. In 100 lifetimes, I would choose you in each one. She kissed him then, pouring all her anguish and love and guilt into the contact. He responded with equal desperation, and for a moment, the outside world ceased to exist. There was only them, two souls that had found each other across an impossible divide. When they finally parted, both breathing hard, Sarah saw tears on his face, the warrior who had told her that tears cleanse the spirit finally allowing his own to fall. Your people will never forgive this, she whispered. No, he agreed. But perhaps someday they will understand that love does not ask permission or follow the rules we set for it. It simply is. The next days passed in a strange twilight state. The camp operated without clear leadership, the elders attempting to maintain order while debating who should assume the chief's role. Eagle Feather kept his word, organizing hunting parties and managing disputes. But everyone knew it was temporary. He was already a ghost to them, a man who had chosen exile over honor. Some warriors came to him privately, offering to follow him when he left. These he turned away gently but firmly. Find your futures here, he told them. My path is not yours to walk. Mourning Dove maintained stony silence, speaking to him only through intermediaries about matters concerning the children. She had won her freedom but found it a bitter prize. The other women comforted her, praised her courage. But Sarah sometimes caught her staring at Eagle Feather's lodge with an expression of profound loss. One evening, as Sarah prepared the evening meal, Little Hawk appeared at their entrance. The boy clutched something in his small fist, his face torn between defiance and sorrow. Father, he called hesitantly. Eagle Feather emerged, his face lighting up at the sight of his youngest son. Little Hawk, come, sit with me. The boy shook his head. Mother says I cannot, but I brought this. He extended his hand, revealing a small carved horse, one of Eagle Feather's gifts from happier times. I do not want it anymore. The rejection was a knife to the heart. Eagle Feather knelt before his son, making no move to take the toy. Keep it, my son. Remember that your father loves you, even if he has chosen a path you cannot understand. Grandmother says you are sick, that the white woman has poisoned your spirit. Perhaps she has, Eagle Feather said gently. But sometimes what others call poison feels like medicine to the one who drinks it. Someday, when you are older, you may understand. Little Hawk dropped the carved horse in the snow and ran back to his mother's lodge without another word. Eagle Feather remained kneeling, staring at the small wooden figure slowly being covered by falling snow. Sarah wanted to go to him, to offer comfort, but knew her presence would only underscore the cause of his pain. That night, as they lay on opposite sides of the fire, still maintaining the fiction of propriety, Eagle Feather spoke into the darkness. Do you know what the old stories say about eagles who fly too close to the sun? They burn. Sarah replied softly, Yes, but first, for one glorious moment, they touch heaven. He turned to look at her across the flames. You are my son, Sarah Morrison, and I would rather burn than never have flown at all. The declaration hung between them, beautiful and terrible in its finality. Outside, the wind picked up, whistling through the camp like the voices of all the spirits they had offended. Soon, very soon, the consequences of their impossible love would demand their final price. But for now, in the space between heartbeats, they had this moment, two eagles spiraling toward the sun, choosing the burning over the safety of earth. The winter moon hung full and cold above the camp, casting silver light across the snow-covered lodges. inside Eaglefeather's dwelling. The fire had burned low, leaving more shadow than light. Sarah lay wakeful on her side of the lodge, listening to the wind and the distant howl of wolves. 3 months had passed since the council meeting that had stripped Eaglefeather of his position. 3 months of existing in a strange limbo between acceptance and exile. Tomorrow, the elders would formally name Black Crow as the new chief. The ceremony would mark the final severing of Eaglefeather's ties to the leadership he had inherited from his father. After that, they would be truly adrift, waiting only for spring to make their departure possible. She heard Eaglefeather shift on his side of the fire, equally restless. The careful distance they had maintained all these months felt like a mockery now. What were they preserving? What honor remained to protect? They had already paid every price except the final one. "You are awake," he said softly. "As are you." Silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words. Then Eaglefeather rose, moving around the dying fire to kneel beside her. In the moonlight filtering through the smoke hole, his face was all plains and shadows, beautiful and tragic. "Tomorrow I am nothing," he said. "No longer chief, no longer husband, barely still Apache. Everything I was will be stripped away." Sarah sat up, her heart racing. "You are still you, still the man who destroyed his life for love." His laugh was bitter. "Yes, I am still that fool. Don't," she reached out, her fingers touching his face. "Don't reduce what we have to foolishness. If it is madness, at least it is a divine madness." He caught her hand, pressing it against his cheek. "Divine madness. Is that what the white people call it when a man throws away everything for a woman? They call it romance when it ends happily." Sarah said, "Tragedy when it doesn't. And which are we?" She moved closer, close enough to feel his breath on her face. "I don't know. But I know that tomorrow you lose everything, and I cannot let this night pass without—" She trailed off, unable to voice what burned in her heart. "Without," his voice had gone rough, "without showing you that you gained something too, that in losing everything, you gained me. Completely." The last barrier between them crumbled. Eaglefeather pulled her against him, his mouth finding hers in a kiss that was desperate and tender and full of months of denied longing. Sarah responded with equal fervor, her arms winding around his neck, holding him as if she could keep the world at bay through sheer will. "Sarah," he breathed against her lips. "My heart, my destruction, my salvation." She silenced him with another kiss, pouring all the words she couldn't say into the contact. Outside, she heard footsteps crunching in the snow, night guards making their rounds, or perhaps others with darker purposes. But she no longer cared. Let them come. Let them see. The price had already been paid in everything but this. Eaglefeather drew back, his eyes searching hers. "Are you certain there will be no returning from this?" "There is already no returning," she whispered. "We crossed that river long ago. This is just admitting we stand on the far shore." He made a sound low in his throat, somewhere between a growl and a prayer, then claimed her mouth again. This time there was no hesitation, no holding back. The fire that had smoldered between them for so long finally burst into full flame. They came together with the desperation of the condemned, every touch a defiance against the world that would keep them apart. In the language of skin and breath and heartbeat, they wrote their own law, their own sacred bond that transcended the rules of Apache and white man alike. When passion finally gave way to tenderness, they lay entwined, Sarah's head on Eaglefeather's chest, listening to his heartbeat. His fingers combed through her hair, now loose and spilling like moonlight across his skin. "In my culture," she said softly, "they would call me a fallen woman now. And in mine, I am a man who has broken sacred trusts," he replied. "Yet I feel more whole than I have in years. Perhaps that's what love is." Sarah mused. The willingness to fall and call it flying. He tightened his arms around her. "Then let us fly, my heart, for whatever time we have left." But their moment of peace was shattered by commotion outside. Voices raised in alarm. the sound of running feet. Eagle Feather was on his feet instantly. Reaching for his weapons, he had barely pulled on his clothing when the lodge flap burst open. 3 warriors stood there, Black Crow, who would be chief tomorrow, and 2 others Sarah recognized as men who had long resented Eagle Feather's leadership. Their faces were twisted with rage and disgust as they took in the scene before them. "So the rumors are true," Black Crow spat. "The great Eagle Feather ruts with his white woman like a dog in heat, while his people starve and struggle." Eagle Feather stepped forward, shielding Sarah with his body. "You have no right to enter my lodge uninvited." "Your lodge?" Black Crow laughed harshly. "Nothing here is yours anymore. You gave it all away for her." His eyes fixed on Sarah with burning hatred. "The council meets now. You will answer for this final insult. The council has no authority over me. I am no longer chief. But you are still Apache," one of the other warriors said. "And you have broken our most sacred laws. You have lain with the enemy, polluted yourself, and brought shame upon us all." Sarah pulled a blanket around herself, her mind racing. She had known this moment would come, but not so soon. Not like this. "I'll come," she said. "If someone must answer, silence, white woman." Black Crow's hand went to his knife. "You speak when spoken to, if at all." Eagle Feather's stance shifted dangerously. "Touch her and die." The tension crackled like lightning about to strike. For a moment, violence seemed inevitable. Then Black Crow stepped back, a cruel smile playing at his lips. "Come then, both of you. Let the people see what their former chief has become." They were dragged through the camp, Sarah barely given time to dress properly. People emerged from their lodges, drawn by the shouting and commotion. Women covered their children's eyes. Warriors spat in the snow as they passed. Mourning Dove stood in her doorway, her face a mask of pain and vindication. The council fire had been hastily rebuilt. The elders gathered in a circle. But this was no formal proceeding. This was mob justice wearing the thin veneer of tradition. Sarah saw it in their faces, in the way hands rested on weapon hilts, in the ugly energy that filled the air. Spotted Crow stood, his medicine bundle raised high. "The spirits cry out for cleansing. This woman has bewitched our chief, turned him from his path. She must be cast out, and he must be purified of her influence." "There is no bewitchment," Eagle Feather said firmly. "Only love. If that is a crime, then I am guilty." "Love?" Black Crow sneered. "You speak of love while your children weep for their father, while your people lose their way. This is not love. It is selfishness, weakness, betrayal." The crowd murmured agreement, their anger building like a thunderstorm. Sarah felt the violence hovering just beneath the surface, waiting for an excuse to explode. "I have asked for nothing but to be left in peace," Eagle Feather continued. "Come spring, we will leave. Until then, you corrupt us with your presence." Sleeping Bear interrupted, his aged voice heavy with sorrow. "Every day you remain, you weaken us. The young men see their chief choose a white woman over his own. The women see marriage vows mean nothing. The children see that honor can be cast aside for desire." "Then let us leave now," Sarah said, stepping forward despite Eagle Feather's warning gesture. "Tonight, we'll take nothing but what we need to survive. You'll never see us again." "You think you can walk away so easily?" Black Crow's voice rose to a shout. "After all the destruction you've caused, the families torn apart, the band split, our chief brought low, blood demands blood." The crowd surged forward, and Sarah knew with cold certainty that they would not survive this night. The months of resentment and discord had built to this moment, and there would be no peaceful resolution. It was Mourning Dove who saved them, though whether from mercy or a crueler fate, Sarah would never know. "Stop!" The chief's former wife pushed through the crowd, her voice commanding attention. "You want blood? Then take mine. I am the one who failed. I could not hold my husband's heart. I could not keep him from straying. In the old ways, the shame is mine as much as his." The crowd hesitated, confused by this unexpected turn. Mourning Dove continued, her voice steady and clear. But I will not have murder done in the name of honor. Eagle Feather was a great chief once. He led us through war and hardship. He deserves better than to be torn apart by those he protected." She turned to Eagle Feather, and for a moment, Sarah saw the ghost of what they had once been to each other. "Go," Mourning Dove said quietly. "Tonight, take your white woman and go. But know this, you are dead to us. Your name will not be spoken. Your deeds will be forgotten. You will be as one who never existed. It was exile, complete and irrevocable. In some ways, worse than death. But it was also survival." Eagle Feather bowed his head, accepting the judgment. Then he took Sarah's hand, publicly claiming her before them all. "So be it. I accept your terms." They were given 1 hour to gather their belongings. No one helped them. No one spoke to them. They were already ghosts, invisible to their former people. Sarah packed what little they could carry while Eagle Feather prepared the horses, his movements mechanical, his face showing nothing of the devastation she knew he felt. As they mounted to leave, Little Hawk broke free from his mother's grasp and ran toward them. "Father! Father! Don't go!" Eagle Feather stopped his horse, looking down at his youngest son with eyes full of anguish. "Be strong, Little Hawk. Obey your mother. Remember that you are Apache." "But you're Apache too," the boy cried. "No," Eagle Feather said quietly. "Not anymore." He turned his horse and rode into the darkness, Sarah beside him, behind them. The camp that had been his whole world faded into the night. Ahead lay only the unknown, the wilderness, and each other. They rode in silence through the frozen darkness, two outcasts bound by a love that had cost them everything. The night that had begun with passion had ended in exile. The price of their union paid in full. There was no going back now. No home to return to, no people to claim them. They were alone in the vast wilderness, with nothing but their love to sustain them against whatever trials lay ahead. It would have to be enough. The mountains rose before them like ancient sentinels, their peaks lost in clouds heavy with unspent snow. For 7 days, Eagle Feather and Sarah had pushed deeper into the wilderness, following paths known only to wild animals and the wind. Behind them lay the ashes of their former lives. Ahead, only the uncertain promise of survival. Their third horse had gone lame yesterday, forcing them to abandon precious supplies. Now they rode double on Eagle Feather's paint. Sarah's arms wrapped around his waist, both of them swaying with exhaustion. The remaining pack horse struggled under its burden, breath steaming in the frigid air. "There!" Eagle Feather pointed to a narrow valley between two peaks. "We'll shelter there tonight." Sarah merely nodded, too tired to speak. Her hands, once soft from a life of relative comfort, were now cracked and bleeding from the cold. Her body ached in places she hadn't known could hurt. But worse than the physical pain was the hollow look in Eagle Feather's eyes, the look of a man severed from everything that had defined him. They made camp in a cave halfway up the valley wall, protected from the worst of the wind. Eagle Feather built a small fire while Sarah unpacked what remained of their supplies. A few strips of dried meat, a handful of cornmeal, 2 water skins nearly empty, enough for perhaps 3 more days if they were careful. "I'll hunt tomorrow," Eagle Feather said, his voice hoarse from disuse. They had barely spoken during their flight, each lost in private grief. The snow is too deep, game will be scarce. He didn't argue because she was right. Winter had the mountains in an iron grip, and they were poorly equipped for extended survival. The exile had been a death sentence delivered slowly. Black Crow and the others had known it. That night, as they huddled together for warmth, Sarah felt Eagle Feather shaking. At first she thought it was the cold, but then she realized he was weeping, silent, body-racking sobs that he tried to muffle against her shoulder. "I'm sorry," she whispered, holding him tighter. "I'm so sorry." "My son," he choked out. "Did you see his face? He'll grow up believing his father abandoned him for a white woman's bed. He'll carry that poison in his heart forever." Sarah had no comfort to offer because it was true. History would paint them as selfish lovers who chose passion over responsibility. No one would remember the quiet conversations, the meeting of minds and souls that had made their love inevitable. They would be reduced to a cautionary tale, a warning against the dangers of forbidden desire. "We could go back," she said, though she knew it was impossible. "I could leave, go to a settlement. You could return. Say I escaped." "No." His arms tightened around her. "That life is dead to me now. You are all I have left, all I want left." They clung to each other as the fire died to embers. Two people stripped of everything but their connection. Outside, snow began to fall again, sealing them into their stone shelter as effectively as any prison. The next morning brought a brief respite. Weak sunlight filtered through the clouds, and Eagle Feather managed to bring down a winter-thin rabbit with his bow. They ate it half raw, too hungry to wait for proper cooking, and for a moment felt almost hopeful. "There's a trading post," Eagle Feather said, studying the horizon. "Maybe 3 days north, Fort Bridger. We could resupply there." Sarah knew what he wasn't saying, that a white woman and an Apache man arriving together would draw attention, suspicion, possibly violence. But they had no choice. They would starve or freeze without supplies. They pushed on, rationing their strength as carefully as their food. The landscape grew even more forbidding. Sheer cliffs, treacherous ice-covered paths, drops that would mean certain death if a horse placed a hoof wrong. Once, they heard wolves howling in the distance and spent a sleepless night keeping the fire high, weapons ready. On the second day, disaster struck. The pack horse, weakened by cold and poor forage, stumbled on an icy ledge. Sarah watched in horror as it tumbled down the mountainside, taking with it their remaining supplies, extra blankets, and Eagle Feather's rifle. They stood in the swirling snow, staring at the dark shape far below. Without those supplies, their chances of reaching Fort Bridger had gone from slim to nearly impossible. "We go back," Sarah said. "To the cave. Wait for the weather to break." "The weather won't break for months," Eagle Feather replied flatly. "And there's no food to hunt. We go forward or we die." So they went forward, sharing Eagle Feather's horse, traveling as fast as they dared. Hunger became their constant companion, a gnawing emptiness that made every movement an effort. Sarah found herself dreaming of food, fresh bread, roasted meat, even the simple corn mush she'd eaten as a prisoner. On the night before they hoped to reach Fort Bridger, they found shelter in a grove of pines. Eagle Feather had managed to kill a scrawny ground squirrel, barely a mouthful of meat between them. As they chewed the tough flesh, Sarah noticed how gaunt he had become, how his clothes hung loose on his once powerful frame. "You're giving me your portions," she accused. He didn't deny it. "You need strength. We both need strength." "No." His eyes met hers, full of a terrible peace. "You need strength. You can survive in the white world. I cannot." "Don't talk like that, Sarah." He took her face in his hands, his touch gentle despite their dire circumstances. "We both know how this ends. Even if we reach the fort, even if they don't shoot me on sight, what then? I cannot be white. You cannot be Apache. We exist nowhere." "We exist here," she said fiercely, pressing his hands against her face. "Now, together. That's enough." "Is it?" His thumb traced her cheekbone. "Is love enough when the world offers no place for it?" She kissed him instead of answering, pouring all her desperation and defiance into the contact. He responded with equal fervor, and for a moment, the cold and hunger faded away. There was only them, only this connection that had cost so much and given so much in return. They made love there in the snow-covered grove, a final affirmation of the choice they had made. Every touch was precious, every whispered word a prayer against the darkness closing in. When passion finally gave way to exhaustion, they lay entwined, sharing what little warmth their bodies could generate. "If I die tomorrow," Eagle Feather murmured against her hair, "I die without regret." "You won't die," Sarah said fiercely. "I won't let you." But when morning came, Eagle Feather could barely stand, the combination of cold, hunger, and the infected wound on his side. a parting gift from their flight through the rocky terrain, had finally overwhelmed his strength. Sarah supported him onto the horse, terror giving her strength she didn't know she possessed. Fort Bridger appeared through the snow like a mirage. Wooden walls, smoke rising from chimneys, the promise of salvation. But as they approached, Sarah's heart sank. Soldiers manned the gates, their rifles ready. She could see their faces change as they registered what approached, a ragged white woman and a clearly Apache man. "That's far enough," a sergeant called out. "State your business." Sarah raised her hands, trying to project harmlessness. "Please, we need help. Food, medical supplies. We can pay." The lie died on her lips. They had nothing to pay with. "That's an Apache," one soldier said, spitting tobacco juice into the snow. "We don't serve Apache here." "He's my husband," Sarah said desperately. "Please, he's sick. Just let us buy supplies and we'll leave." The soldiers exchanged glances, a mixture of disgust and dark amusement. The sergeant studied them for a long moment, taking in Eagle Feather's fevered face, Sarah's desperate eyes. "Your husband? Eh?" He laughed. "An ugly sound. Well, ain't that something? Boys, a white woman so desperate she'd take an Apache to her bed." Sarah felt Eagle Feather tense behind her, his pride warring with their need. She placed a warning hand on his arm. "Please," she said again. "Christian charity. We ask nothing but the chance to trade for supplies." The sergeant considered, then shook his head. "No Apache sets foot in this fort. That's final." He paused, a cruel smile playing at his lips. "But you, ma'am, you can come in alone. Might be we can find some charity for a white woman, even one who's fallen so low." The implication was clear. Sarah's stomach turned, but she kept her voice steady. "Both of us or neither." "Then neither. Move along before we decide that Apache looks like he might be wanted for something." They turned away, Sarah guiding the exhausted horse back toward the wilderness. Behind them, she heard the soldiers laughing, making crude jokes about Apache lovers and fallen women. Each word was a lash, but she kept her back straight, her head high. When they were out of sight of the fort, Eagle Feather slumped against her, burning with fever. "You should have gone in," he mumbled. "Should have left me." "Never," Sarah said fiercely. "Never." They found shelter in an abandoned prospector's cabin 2 miles from the fort. The roof leaked and wind whistled through gaps in the walls. But it was better than nothing. Sarah built a fire with their last matches, melted snow for water, and tried to make Eagle Feather comfortable on the moldy remains of a straw mattress. His fever raged through the night. He called out in Apache, reliving moments Sarah couldn't understand. Sometimes he spoke to his children, begging their forgiveness. Sometimes he was back in battle, warning warriors of danger. And sometimes he simply said her name, over and over, like a prayer or a curse. Sarah held him through it all, cooling his fever with snow, forcing water between his cracked lips. She had no medicine, no food, nothing but her will to keep him alive. As dawn light crept through the cabin's gaps, she made a decision. "I'll go back," she told his unconscious form. "I'll do whatever they want, get medicine, food. I'll save you, my love, even if it damns me." But as she rose to leave, his hand caught hers with surprising strength. His eyes were clear for the first time in hours, focused on her face with terrible intensity. "No," he said. "We chose each other. We face whatever comes together. You'll die. Then I die free." He pulled her down beside him, his voice growing stronger. "Do you remember what I told you? About the hawk in the cage?" Sarah nodded, tears streaming down her face. "We flew, my heart. We touched the sun." He smiled, the expression transforming his gaunt features. "That is enough, more than most ever have." They lay together in the abandoned cabin, holding each other as Eagle Feather's life slowly ebbed away. Outside, the indifferent sun rose over a world that had no place for their love. But inside, for these last precious hours, they had created their own world, a place where Apache and white meant nothing, where love was the only law that mattered. When the end came, it was peaceful, Eagle Feather simply stopped breathing. His last word, her name. His face turned toward hers. Sarah held him long after he grew cold, unwilling to let go of the only person who had ever truly seen her, truly known her, truly loved her without reservation. Eventually, she would have to move. She would have to find a way to survive, to carry on somehow. But for now, she simply held him and wept for all they had lost and all they had found. 2 eagles who had dared to fly too high and touched heaven before they fell. The morning sun cast long shadows through the gaps in the cabin walls, painting golden stripes across the floor where Sarah knelt beside Eagle Feather's still form. She had wrapped him in the lone blanket, his face peaceful in death as it had rarely been in those final desperate days. Her tears had long since dried, leaving only a hollow ache that seemed to echo through her entire being. With trembling fingers, she cut a lock of his hair, wrapping it carefully in a piece of cloth torn from her dress. It was all she could take with her, all that remained of the man who had given up everything for love. The ground outside was frozen too hard for burial, and she had no tools. She would have to leave him here, another ghost in this cabin of abandoned dreams. "Forgive me," she whispered, pressing her lips to his cold forehead one last time. "I cannot give you the burial you deserve, but I will carry you with me always, in every beat of my heart, in every breath I take." She stood on unsteady legs, forcing herself to think practically. The horse was gone, wandered off during the night while she held vigil. She had no food, no weapon save Eagle Feather's knife, no clear destination, but she would not die here. She would survive, if only to ensure their story did not die with them. Sarah took Eagle Feather's knife and the water skin, leaving everything else with him. At the doorway, she turned back one final time. Sunlight illuminated his face, and for a moment she could almost pretend he was only sleeping, that he would wake and call her name. But the illusion shattered with her next breath, and she stepped out into the bitter morning. The walk back toward Fort Bridger took most of the day. Each step was agony, her feet numb and boots worn through to nothing. Hunger gnawed at her constantly, but it was nothing compared to the grief that threatened to overwhelm her with each breath. She focused on putting one foot in front of the other, on the simple act of survival that Eagle Feather had died to ensure. As the fort's walls came into view, Sarah paused. She knew what awaited her there: contempt, propositions, the complete destruction of whatever dignity remained to her. But she also knew she had no choice. Pride was a luxury she could no longer afford. This time, she approached alone, a ghost of a woman in tattered clothes and grief-hollowed eyes. The same sergeant stood guard, and his eyes widened with recognition. "Well, well," he drawled. "The Apache lover returns. Where's your brave warrior now?" "Dead," Sarah said simply. The word fell like a stone between them. Something in her voice or expression must have penetrated his cruelty, for the sergeant's smirk faded slightly. "Dead, eh? Well, that's what comes of taking up with savages." Sarah said nothing, simply stood there swaying slightly, beyond caring about his judgment or anyone else's. After a moment, the sergeant sighed. "There's a woman runs a boarding house at the edge of town, Widow Hutchins. She might take pity on you, give you work." He paused, then added with surprising gruffness, "You look about done in, woman. Better get there before you fall over." It was more kindness than she had expected. Sarah managed a nod of thanks and stumbled toward the settlement that sprawled beyond the fort's walls. Each step required enormous effort, but she forced herself forward, driven by the promise Eagle Feather had seen in her, the strength to survive even this. Widow Hutchins proved to be a severe woman with steel-gray hair and eyes that had seen too much. She took one look at Sarah and recognized a fellow survivor of the frontier's cruelties. "You'll work for your keep," she said bluntly. "Cooking, cleaning, washing. No questions about your past, no judgment, but no charity either. You pull your weight or you're out." "Yes, ma'am," Sarah whispered. "And you'll clean yourself up. I run a respectable establishment. Whatever you were before, you're a proper woman under my roof." Sarah nodded, too exhausted to speak further. The widow showed her to a tiny room in the attic, barely large enough for a narrow cot and washstand. To Sarah, it looked like paradise. 4 walls, a roof, safety. The months that followed blurred together in a haze of hard work and carefully suppressed grief. Sarah threw herself into the labor, scrubbing floors until her hands bled, cooking meals until the heat of the stove became a constant companion. The other boarders, miners, travelers, drifters, learned quickly that the silent woman who served their meals was not to be trifled with. Something in her eyes warned them away from casual advances or cruel comments. At night, alone in her attic room, Sarah would unwrap the lock of Eagle Feather's hair and hold it to her heart. In those moments, the grief would crash over her like a physical force, and she would muffle her sobs in her thin pillow. But by morning, she would rise, wash her face, and face another day. It was what he would have wanted. For her to live, to carry on, to prove that their love had meaning beyond its tragic end. Spring came slowly to Fort Bridger, the snow retreating to reveal a world reborn. Sarah stood at her window one April morning, watching the sun rise over the mountains where Eagle Feather lay. She was thinner now, worn down by work and sorrow, but still standing, still breathing, still remembering. A knock at her door interrupted her reverie. Widow Hutchins stood there, her usual stern expression softened slightly. "There's a wagon train forming up," she said. "Heading to California. They need a cook, someone who won't faint at the first sign of trouble." "I thought of you." Sarah's first instinct was to refuse. This place, harsh as it was, had become a refuge. But as she looked out at the mountains again, she heard Eagle Feather's voice in her memory. "You have a warrior's spirit trapped in a woman's body." "I'll consider it," she said. The widow nodded and turned to go, then paused. "Sarah, that is your name, isn't it? I never asked before." "Yes, ma'am. Sarah Morrison." "Well, Sarah Morrison, I don't know what brought you to my door looking like death itself. Don't need to know, but I've watched you these months. You've got steel in you, girl. Whatever you're running from or toward, you'll make it." After she left, Sarah returned to the window. California. A new life. A new chance. No one there would know about the Apache chief who had loved his white prisoner more than his own life. No one would judge her for the choices that had led to tragedy. But she would know. She would remember. And perhaps, in that remembering, their love would find its own kind of immortality. The day before the wagon train departed, Sarah made one last pilgrimage. She borrowed a horse and rode out to the abandoned cabin, her heart heavy with the need for farewell. The structure had partially collapsed during the spring thaw, but she could still see the corner where Eagle Feather had died in her arms. She knelt in the doorway, the lock of his hair pressed to her lips. "I'm leaving, my love," she whispered. "Going to California to start anew. But I take you with me, in my heart, in my memories, in the strength you saw in me when I couldn't see it myself." The wind whistled through the ruins, and for a moment she could almost hear his voice in it, telling her to be strong, to fly free, to live the life they couldn't have together. She placed a small cairn of stones where he had lain, a marker that would mean nothing to anyone else but everything to her. "If loving you shattered my world, then let it be so." She repeated his words from that last night. It was worth it. My heart. Every moment was worth it. She rode back to Fort Bridger as the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of fire. Tomorrow she would join the wagon train, would begin the long journey to a new life. She would work, perhaps marry again someday, might even find a measure of peace. But she would never love again. Not like this, not with the fierce, impossible, world-shattering love that had bloomed between an Apache chief and his white prisoner. Their story would fade into legend, distorted by time and prejudice. Some would call it a cautionary tale of passion over duty. Others might see it as a tragedy of two worlds that could never meet. But Sarah would know the truth, that, for one brief, glorious moment, Two souls had found each other across an impossible divide and chosen love over everything else the world held dear. As she prepared for sleep that last night in Fort Bridger, Sarah carefully wrapped Eagle Feather's hair in a piece of soft leather, placing it close to her heart. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new horizons, but tonight she allowed herself to remember a man who had loved her more than his position, his people, his very life. A love that had shattered tribes and traditions, but had also transformed two people forever. In the distance, a wolf howled at the moon, its cry echoing across the vast wilderness. Sarah listened to its lonely song and understood it perfectly. Some loves were never meant for this world, too pure and fierce for the petty rules of society. But that didn't make them less real or less precious. She closed her eyes and whispered into the darkness, "Fly free, my eagle, until we meet again in a place where Apache and white mean nothing, where love is the only law. Wait for me there." The wind carried her words away into the night, across mountains and deserts, to wherever spirits go when their earthly bonds are severed. And somewhere in that vast darkness, she could almost believe he heard her, and was waiting. Sarah Morrison rode out with the wagon train at dawn, her face turned toward the future, but her heart forever dwelling in the past. Behind her, the mountains stood eternal, guarding their secrets, the story of a forbidden love that had burned too bright and paid the ultimate price, yet had touched heaven before it fell. Thank you so much for listening to this story of forbidden love in the Wild West. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Please share in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe to From Wild West channel and let me know your thoughts about Eagle Feather and Sarah's tragic tale. Did their love justify the price they paid? Share your reflections with our community.